Welcome to our podcast, proudly brought to you by VPA Australia, our trusted supplement provider since Unity Gym started. As sponsored athletes, we're excited to offer you a special 10% discount on top quality supplements that ship worldwide. Just use our discount code from the description. To avoid international shipping fees, contact VPA and tell them we sent you to get a flat shipping rate. Today's episode is also sponsored by the Flexibility Blueprint. Ever felt lost in the sea of social media fitness advice? The Flexibility Blueprint is your map to progress, designed to help you get laser focused on what matters most for your journey in flexibility and strength. And guess what? It's free. Grab it using the link in the description. If you're starting your flexibility journey, don't miss our 20-minute mobility routine. It's your first step to quick wins in flexibility. For those further along, use our Flexibility Masterclass, featuring advanced techniques like loaded stretching and end range strength for the pancake, front splits, middle splits, and more. Links for both are also in the description. And for the seasoned athletes, avoid the frustration of complex training puzzles with our UMS Tribe membership. It's a different online coaching experience with strength and flexibility combined. Don't forget, we're Amazon affiliates too. You can find all the equipment used in our videos and podcasts at the most competitive prices with our affiliate links in the description. Now let's dive into today's episode.
The question of training with a herniated disc often comes up when we're onboarding new clients to the UMS. And it is a question that needs to be really dived into with a professional. So today we've invited our resident physiotherapist, Phil White, to come and discuss the topic of training in the gym with a herniated disc.
Okay, excited. It's definitely a big topic. And if you've listened to me talk before, you've probably heard plenty of my disclaimers going into this about this not being medical advice. And this topic is definitely a big one. Like, I think it's really important to get the context around this, but please, if you do have a disc herniation, if you've had that like imaging findings there or been diagnosed before, or if you're just considering like you have back pain and you don't know what's going on, like just do make sure you know what you're dealing with and like work with a professional on it, because yeah, there's certain injuries where you just get a bit more leeway, I guess, if you haven't quite got things right with, for a shoulder, for example. Obviously it can be painful and you can really hurt yourself, but with the lower back, particularly when we're talking disc herniations or up in the neck, like the downside potential is much higher. So please do make sure that you work with professional and don't just go with what you hear on the internet. There's so much nuance to it.
There and there's such a broad, a wide spectrum or variety of case variables. Like I've seen people like Anthony Minicello, professional rugby league player, who had a really severe disc damage, herniation, and even bone fragments, risking protrusion into the nerve stem. I don't know what they call that or whatever, but he was an extreme case and told that he would never really be able to play rugby league again, competitively, and to make a full recovery, and really not through the types of training or intervention that you would be that you'd probably find common. He did quite radical dietary interventions, lifestyle interventions, things like that. So that's one extreme case, but you've got a very, very trained, very disciplined individual there. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've had clients, which I mentioned very briefly offline, who tried everything we did and just couldn't really get the breakthrough we were looking for, and then found a very different approach worked for him, than what we're sort of accustomed to or prefer, And in the middle of that, we've got clients that we sort of spoke about that you've also known really well, Lockie and Adrian and people like that at Unity Gym, who have come in a very compromised state, or at least feeling like they were in a very compromised state, very apprehensive or nervous about doing exercises like the deadlift, very complex movement patterns, the barbell back squat or front squat, things like that, and ending up down the line doing Olympic lifting and CrossFit, because they had built such robust sort of bodies and more resilient bodies, and I guess would argue that the back pain that they were dealing with when they first came was a thing of the past, So yeah, I think that's really important what you've just said there. This is a bit of footage of Adrian there. Like when he first came in, he looked around. I actually remember this. He had an interview with Rad, And he looked around at the gym and saw the types of exercises people were doing and just said, "Oh, mate, I actually don't think this is the right place for me," because his back was so compromised. And, and he was so fearful because he'd done it, or at least experienced the most extreme levels of pain and discomfort right after a gym exercises, deadlifting. And so a lot of people, we have this sort of constant mantra that we first heard from yourself, Phil, and Nilesh, when we were working in the gym. We tend to blame exercises for our pain. And I don't know if it was you or Nilesh that said it first on the podcast. It's not the exercise that hurt you; it's how you got there.
Yeah,
You
he's
know, so
specifically saying it's not high load that gets you. It's how you get there. But yeah, it's so true. People do get that about intense exercise. They also get that about really specific exercises, which we've talked about before. But yeah, it's spot on.
yeah, so I like what you've said there. It's so important to work with a professional, get that diagnosis, and be confident that it's important. But then there is that discussion that we've had where you are not, the experiences that you deal with on a day-to-day basis don't necessarily always align perfectly with your scans and your morphology. Is that
Yeah, and I think getting into like starting out with the diagnosis, I think is really important because a lot of people will experience back pain. They might have some leg symptoms as well with some referred pain, and they go in and get scanned, and they see that there's a disc bulge there, and then straight away, like if they've just seen a GP, for example, who hasn't done a thorough assessment, they go in there, they get the scans, and then find out that they have a disc herniation. Then the obvious leap is to say like, okay, I've got a like compressive issue on one of my spinal nerves, and that's what's causing this back pain and this leg pain. But the tricky thing is with this, as you mentioned there, like morphology changes. So basically, like structural changes to your tissue, is that like there's been really good studies showing that like with 20 like within asymptomatic population, so people who don't have any symptoms at all, no pain, no weakness, no nerve issues, that in 20-year-olds that can be like up to I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 20% of people in that age group might have some level of disc bulge or disc herniation and have zero pain, zero issues whatsoever. And with 80-year-olds, I think it's right up there. Most, like, vast majority of the population have
was there
some level of disc bulge and disc herniation, but they don't have any pain. And so if you have that there and you've got full function, no issues, it's been lying there, say from the age of 20, and then you get a scan in your 30s and you say, it's the disc bulge that's causing this issue, then it could well be, but it also could be that just is a finding that is there without without actually being the kind of causing agent here. So for example, like you do get referred pain down your leg from things like so basically there's like nerve referred pain, there's somatic referred pain, which means somatic is basically pertaining to the body. So if you have areas like hip arthritis, for example, is really common to get referred pain. Even like the trochanteric bursitis, things like conditions like that will often have a referring symptoms. And then also metabolic conditions like diabetes, you get nerve conditions down by the foot. So it's just so much more complicated than a lot of people initially think. And yeah, just because there is a herniation there, it doesn't necessarily mean, unless you've had like a really good diagnosis, that it is the thing that is causing the issue.
Yeah, and I think that's really important that we get across in the beginning here, because I've experienced that firsthand. I've had a really quite serious back injury when I was much younger, and I did deal with many years of pain and discomfort, and it felt really quite helpless, and struggled with exercises, especially things like the deadlift and the squat. And funnily enough, only about maybe would have been maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. I'm pretty bad with remembering time, to be completely honest. But it was a long time after I sort of overcame the issue. I had a relapse squatting the first time I met a friend of mine now, Ben Pekolsky, who was a Olympia bodybuilder. We were at a workshop and I was warming up on a squat, and my back just went into really quite severe spasm, and I ended up in hospital. It was that severe. I couldn't get out of bed. And I was convinced that it was a relapse of, something that had happened to me years and years ago. And really interestingly, when I went in to have MRI scans and everything done, there was actually still a lot of evidence of damage to the tissue, which I had thought was a complete thing of the past. And then a few years later, when I was completely beyond any of this discomfort, I was squatting 180 kilos, deadlifting 220 kilos, doing all sorts of really great stuff, boxing and whatever, with zero back pain. I went back for another checkup. I don't know what it was all about. And yeah, still there was no change in the morphology of my scan. Like there's still a lot, like they did I think it was an X-ray. It was an X-ray of my spine because I was concerned about a postural issue that I was trying to overcome. And they said, you've got a lot of like disc degeneration in your lower back, and there's evidence of quite a severe injury down there. So you should be careful, the osteopath said. And I was like, yeah, that's an injury that happened when I was a kid, So yeah, it's a great example of the fact that the imaging doesn't necessarily mean pain, And I recall years ago, I read a study, and you might be a bit more accurate with this, about Olympic athletes during the Olympics doing this, where they had them scanned, and an enormous amount of them had issues with their spine. They had either little disc bulges or disc degeneration and things like that. None of them knew it, and they were all competing at the highest level, pain-free. So I think there is this, and this is a whole nother discussion about, pain science and feeling confident in your body when you're well-trained, when you're a well-trained individual and you're strong and flexible and fit. You tend to perceive pain a little bit differently than someone who's more frail or more less trained, less conditioned individual, despite the fact that the injury or the morphology could look identical in a scan.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and one for the past listeners have probably heard a fair amount about. So
Yep.
yeah, and I will definitely talk about that. I just wanted to come back to, I was looking at the
Let's
numbers from that study I mentioned before. It was 37% of 20-year-olds with like of asymptomatic 20-year-olds in this study had disc degeneration, and up to 96% of the 80-year-olds. And then with disc bulges, it was 30% in 20-year-olds, 84% in 80-year-olds, and disc protrusion from 29% up to 43% in 80 plus. So like, yeah, it's just, I think, a really important thing to realize that, yeah, there's really common for these things to happen and have no issues whatsoever. So obviously that doesn't mean that they're fine, and they're totally, it's all good and we shouldn't have any considerations when they happen. But just knowing that sometimes, yeah, as you said before, like you can get scans where you're expecting to find something, and if there is that disc bulge there, that could be the cause of the pain. But also, like, the scan won't be showing severe muscle spasm. Like, it can't light up on the
Yeah.
imaging and
Yeah.
show you that. So it might be this sort of severe muscle spasm, which can be so incredibly painful. Like, people don't sometimes realize
Listen,
just how
5 days I was bedridden.
yeah,
And on the like on the second day, it was so bad that I had to call an ambulance. Like, I
yeah,
literally couldn't get out of bed to go to the toilet without
yeah,
help,
yeah,
and because I was away from home, I was up in the Gold Coast for a workshop. Yeah, I was, and the other boys that I was staying with had all gone to the second day of the workshop, and I was there alone. I couldn't get out of bed to go to the toilet. It was that painful, and I just needed some muscle relaxants. I needed confirmation that I hadn't busted something, really severe. And then, I was able to sort of manage it. So let's just quickly take a moment and step out. And so we first really want to make that point that working with a professional is important. And we're blessed to have Phil here that we can liaise with and talk to. And, if you're in the UMS tribe, you will have access to him, and we can also hook you up with him if you're not, because he works with his patients online. He's a 100% online physiotherapist or physical therapist for those of you around the world. And I actually had a conversation with someone recently who's in Europe, and he was asking me questions that I just said, listen, like, it was not related to lower back, it was related to hamstring, but he had felt like he was doing our flexibility masterclass, felt like he'd overcooked or hurt his hamstring, and he wanted to know how, to proceed. And I said, look, and he was trying to diagnose based on our conversations back and forth via email and then using Google. And I said, listen, man, like, you really want to get a professional who's trained to diagnose this sort of stuff, to give you a little bit of help here. Don't diagnose based on what I'm telling you in an email or what you can Google. And whether he follows through with it or not is his choice. But it's really important. Number one, step one, align yourself with the right professional that can help guide you.
yeah. And what's so hard about the professionals, just on that, because I mean, it's quite a current topic in March 2024 about like professionals and their opinions on back pain. Like there's a big I don't know if it's just the circles I'm in, but with uh, Stuart McGill going on Peter Attia's podcast, and he was talking about like disc herniations and particularly like the one that really got a lot of attention was the like whether it's a good idea to deadlift if you've you know going for PBs kind of plus 50, and Stuart McGill went out there and said like, oh, if you shouldn't be going for, you can choose either like picking your grandkids off the ground or getting deadlift PBs. You can't have both when you're above 50, and that really sent off a bit of a a response throughout the sort of health and fitness and particularly physio crowd. So even when you do see professionals, like it's hard to kind of portray just how much like the different people will have different opinions, different people believe wildly different things because it's so hard. Human bodies are so complex. There are so many, like there's a million studies coming out a year and you can find one that supports your theory or goes against it. Like there's just so much information out there that it is very challenging to like there's no like generally there's not a whole lot of consensus, and particularly about complex things like lower back pain where there are just infinite variables involved. So do be aware that if you have been told something by one professional that doesn't help you, like it is worth sort of looking around. And my advice for this is always like work with someone who one like has this particular interest in that idea, in that area. Two, ideally has had it themselves, and three, kind of does the similar things to what you do. So if you train, like work with someone who also trains because they'll understand how important that is to you and have a bit more kind of context around it. So just to kind of flag it that like there's no, I wish that we all sort of had all the answers, but there is just so much complexity in this that there is a bit of
It's kind of think of it like taking your car to a mechanic, and you wouldn't take a Mercedes to a Volvo dealership to be repaired. They have their niches that they specialize in, and some mechanics are brilliant. I had a friend of mine that I was hanging out with the other day. He's got an old Land Rover being restored, and he wanted to take it to his mechanic, and his mechanic said, "Man, I just don't have the experience and the tools with this sort of stuff. I work with modern cars, and so physical therapists and professionals generally, they have their niche that they're really good at, and I really like what Phil said there. Make sure you're working with someone who has some skin in the game in the area or the niche that you're interested in. So if you're a weightlifter or if you're a CrossFitter or if you're a triathlete, then try and find a physiotherapist that also competes or has some experience in that field as well, because they're going to be so much better suited to working with you. And then the next thing I really want to dive into, Phil, is, we touched on this just before, why is it that someone can have the exact same morphology as someone else, and one of them is absolutely bedridden from it and defeated, and the other person hardly even knows about it? And I think this is where we could, probably spend a bit of time with the discussion in this general concept of, and then we can bring it into, if you're person A or person B, how do you train in the presence of a disc bulge that is causing you problems, that is diagnosed and that you're pretty sure is the cause of your problem, how to proceed from there. But from a general perspective, the trained individual experiences this, or is far less likely to be really bowled over, really set back by a diagnosis like this than the untrained individual. And we'll just spend a moment explaining why that is.
Yeah, so I guess how you can have such two different experiences from similar morphology, like in the very like direct disc bulge experience or disc herniation or discogenic problem, there's a lot of people think sort of like it's always going to be a compressive issue. So as soon as you've got the bulge, that's compressing on the nerves, and then as soon as your nerves are compressed, then they're going to be damaged by doing anything that will lead to further compression. But there's kind of a two-step process here where there's a compressive element and then there's a irritation and inflammation element. So often you kind of get this initial compression, and then it's the like the inflammatory cascade and ongoing like re-irritation and inflammatory process that then keeps it going and producing these symptoms. So the thing to think about is like there might be some people who have, I guess, like an ongoing irritation, and that could just be some kind of lifestyle factors. So it might be people who are doing re-aggravating activities, whether that's because their work is such that they just kind of can't take the time off to let it settle down. Obviously with inflammation, there's all sorts of like metabolic factors as well that kind of play into it, and systemic inflammation. So there is going to be that as well. And yeah, with like tissue, like with injury, as I said, like a lot of people have these kind of asymptomatic findings, and we sort of made it sound like if you look at someone at 20 and then at 30, they'll have exactly the same thing. But you do actually, the body's pretty clever at healing. We wouldn't have got this far as a species if the body didn't heal. So there is certainly this, ability to, heal. Like discs take longer than muscles, for example. Like muscles have lots of blood flow, they will heal much quicker. But with disc bulges, because they're a much more avascular tissue, it will take a bit longer. But it's kind of a counterintuitive thing, but often it's the more severe ones that actually lead to like a protrusion and the disc fluid going out into the body. Like the body takes a really big inflammatory response, and part of that is clearing out this tissue. And often then sometimes they do kind of revert back to being like, you see less on the findings, whereas if it's a smaller one that maybe doesn't have that expulsion of the inner parts of the disc, then because you're not getting that massive inflammatory response on the disc tissue itself, it might settle down. So there's just so many factors to even go into there. Like you did mention pain science as well, and I think there's a real like kind of there's the biopsychosocial model is this idea that there's when looking at injury and looking with people, it's going to be partly what's happening in the biology, partly what's happening in the psychology, and then partly what's happening in the social kind of space. And so with the social factor, that might sound a bit weird, but like if you generally, lower socioeconomic, can't maybe seek help as much, you're not unable to take rest because you've got to work really hard. Like those are all the kind of factors that play into that, social factors as well. But there's a real people can be on either end of that spectrum of like, it's all biology and it's all about like just knowing the right movements to do and the right treatments, and just change the structure and you'll be okay. And there's some people who've gone really far on that kind of, the pain science, and not kind of considering structural at all. So it's a tricky one because the answer is somewhere in the middle. And that kind of nuance is really hard when looking at studies from like that look at population level to then apply it to each individual. So there are just, again, it's so multifactorial, and that's maybe not helpful, but it's just the reality is there's just so many factors here.
Look, I think it's very helpful because it highlights what we've been saying from the very beginning, which is that to navigate this on your own is really, really going to be difficult. And this is why surrounding yourself with professionals who can help you, can support you, can give you that guidance. And we're blessed to be in such a modern era where we don't even need to be able to travel to that person's office anymore. You used to go, okay, I want to work with the best physical therapist, physiotherapist, surgeon in the world, and sometimes you had to get on a plane and fly to another country to see them. Nowadays it's just a Zoom call away, a Google Hangout away, and to have this dialogue with someone like yourself, it's so worthwhile. You can't put a price on that if you are going through something like this, and to be able to get given the confidence to know, okay, it's going to be okay. And we have this this saying that I'm pretty sure you coined: motion is lotion. We 9 times out of 10, the worst thing you could do is completely eradicate movement from your day. And even Stuart McGill is a big proponent of, if you're suffering from quite severe back pain, one of the best things you can do is just go for a walk. Just whatever you can manage, just go for a walk, get the gait pattern moving, get the shoulders and hips moving together. And that's going to be really good for it, because it's going to get the blood flowing. It's going to, get those discs sort of absorbing fluid again, and all that sort of thing. And then the way we approach it, because of the type of people that we deal with, we don't, Phil deals with the beginner state much better than we do. We deal with people who are already training, who already have some experience in the gym. So they've got that foundation of, understanding that exercise is really important to them. They don't have to be professional level exercises. They don't have to have all the pieces in. That's what we're here for. We're here to help them put everything into place. But if you're someone who's like either new to exercise, or finding motivation difficult, or you have doubts and things like that, then I would 100% say go and speak to Phil. If you're someone who's got a little bit more experience, maybe a training age of 12 months or more, meaning that you've been training consistently around the gym, around weights, or around stretching for 12 months or more, then I would say that you're ready to come on board with us, and we would be liaising with someone like Phil and making sure that we're giving you the right advice. But in any case, work with that professional, and then understand what your best starting point is, because it might be very different from mine. It might be very different from Anthony Minicello's, who we showed at the start, or some of the members that we've worked with. But what we do know for a fact is that managing load, so getting the load dosage right, the stimulus that you're going to use to sort of you put little bits of stress on the body to get the body encouraged to develop strength, develop flexibility, develop that resilience that is going to, turn the pain signals down, back off the spasms associated with this sort of stuff that could be really affecting you. Managing that load is absolutely paramount and critical to any recovery or any rehabilitation. The choice of
and
exercise.
I'll just jump in on that
Yep.
load discussion there. Is that I think it's just really important to again highlight what words mean in certain contexts, and load.
Yep.
I think a lot of people will just jump to meaning like, okay, I have to back the weight off, but it's really kind of important to understand that with back, like lower back stuff especially, often has a real directional preference. So you were saying there before that often walking around and being upright and staying moving is one of the best things for back pain, but there are certain circumstances where being in that extended position is often really uncomfortable. So people with what's called spinal stenosis often love flexion. They like being a bit bent over because it creates more space within that within the spinal cord column for the spinal cord to not be irritated by other structures, whereas being upright and being an extension is really quite aggravating. So it's really important when you're going through this, and this is why it's important to work with a professional and get a clear diagnosis, is because you've got to figure out, okay, what's the particular situation? What directional preference does it have? Like, is flexion, is extension nice? And does that have any impact on your symptoms? Because typically with these sort of lower back pains and disc herniation, especially, it's going to be some element of back pain and it's going to be some element of leg pain, because it's often that neural involvement that really freaks people out. And there's going to be part of that is going to be with the neural involvement is going to be like a shooting pain often, and the other part is going to be like numbness and loss of sensation and movement. So it's really key to kind of understand that there's these kind of multifactorial like different symptoms you're going to feel, and they'll often respond like the way that they respond will give you some really good clues. So figuring out that directional preference, figuring out like what are your aggravating and what are your easing sort of factors, then applying that to as you start to get back into training, or ideally never stop training, but just keep like moving around it, is really key. So there's no one size all like fits all approach, and that's why having that kind of professional involvement is really good. Now I just want to kind of quickly say, like, physio is often, there's always that kind of like all surgeons, like surgeons bad, doctors bad, like stay with physios. But it's really interesting with back pain. Like it's one that's very clear that like when you have like extreme, when your pain and your symptoms are really debilitating and really like quite bad, there's good research to show that the like getting surgery like on the earlier side of things does have like a really significant impact on people's pain experience in that sort of short to medium term space. So, and getting injections can also be quite a helpful thing if you do have really significant pain. So it's important to think, like, if it's like seriously impacting your life where you can't do anything and you're in a lot of pain, then like worth seeing a physio first and then liaising with them about like, whether it's appropriate to kind of get that surgical referral. And generally people want to kind of leave it for like about 8 weeks, but certainly if it's going past 6 months, then there's this sort of window at the beginning where you can really get a big difference to your pain, like for your level of pain and function. But the interesting thing to consider there is that generally after a year, that like whether you went surgery or not, you'll typically have the same level of pain as well. So the surgery is really like going to work super well for that, for most people in that early stage, but just know that like after a year it's probably going to be about the same. And there are all sorts of risks that do come along with surgical interventions as well. So it's a challenging one, but just know that like there's certainly a role for it. And if you really are debilitated to the point of not being able to engage in life, like you do want to make sure you explore those options. So just thought
And I'll
pop that
just
one in there.
jump onto the back of that and say, in any case, whether you opt for surgical intervention or not, exercise is going to be a key factor in your recovery. So you may as well start to program yourself to adopt a daily regime of some sort of movement practice. And the reality is that you always want to diagnose and find the point that you can start from. And what I was going to get to there, what I was alluding to, is find the right exercises based on that directional preference and things like that, which you're going to need to work with a professional for. It'll be very hard to figure that out for yourself. Work with what you've got, and that is the range of motion is key. You cannot push range of motion when you're suffering back pain. The depth of a bend or a squat or whatever is going to be really, really important to make sure that it's managed properly. Remember, range of movement, so the depth of a stretch or a movement, is a loading variable that can be managed. There's not a one size fits all for everyone. And work with what you've got and then progress from there. And that's what we call progressive overload, you know,
Yeah,
and
and
do it.
coming back to that load definition, then yeah, thinking, how intense, so how much weight you're doing, how much volume, sets, reps, times a week, rest in between, how many, like the range of motion, the speed you're moving. So if you're doing it with slow control, or if you're doing things explosively, and then the complexity of the movement itself. Those are like when we say load, it's like modulating each of those things. So it's really important to understand that, like, yeah, it's going to be that, and we've talked about this like quite a few times in the last few podcasts, but I think it's worth repeating, because the more people can really start to understand that, then it starts to become really apparent how the structure that you guys do with your workouts, like it's infinitely adjustable. Like you can, if you're
Yeah,
starting with what you're doing, you can always, like, you can almost always do the workout, but just adjusting those variables, and it might mean that the range of motion for one movement is just like 10% of what Rad might be doing on the video. But if that's the one that you're sensitive to, then it, like, a progressive overload, as you're about to say, is like one way of increasing it is not changing the volume and the intensity, but just like gradually over time, just reintroducing that range of motion. But yeah, for low
yeah,
back pain and for disc herniations, that range of motion one is the one that you really want to be sensitive, like, careful with. And I think it just goes in, like, and that's just such a big revelation for a lot of people who have stretching as the cure all for all injuries, where they think, okay, I've just
yeah.
got to stretch my way out of this back pain, when really that can often be one of the most aggravating things you can do.
Yeah, it can be one of the worst things you can do. And to give you a really, really basic example of progressive overload, when I went and had a knee reconstruction, I came out, and the day after I got out of surgery, I was doing contractions. So static, isometric, whatever you want to call it. The joint was still, the knee joint wasn't moving, but I was contracting the quadriceps to failure and contracting the hamstrings to failure. And I was doing that multiple times a day. And then within a few days, I was progressing to bending the knee under load, which was a very partial range squat. So I had like a stool set up, and I would just squat down into the stool, flexing the knee, just a tiny little bit like this, and back up again under load. And then eventually I was doing like a half range squat. And then eventually I was doing step ups up a
Yeah, and the
flight of
important stuff
stairs,
of this is, like, people that kind of hear that and think like, oh, that sounds like nothing, but if you really do it and you push it to your limit, like,
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
bloody hard work.
And then you apply the sets, reps, and frequency variables to that. And then, before you know it, I was in the gym doing partial range barbell back squats with a low bar position, and then working up to a box squat. And then eventually I was doing ass to grass squats again, but that took months and months and months of progression. And that's what we're talking about here. Like you may go, oh, I can't, you see an exercise that's been prescribed in a program, say, I can't do that. That causes discomfort. But you may be able to do a partial range version of it, or you may be able to just do an isometric contraction version of it,
Yeah.
and then you work up to the full exercise.
And
Remember, there is
the
so many
important thing to
variables we
remember
can
here is that,
manipulate.
like, there are a lot of people who, they won't do all of that. Like, they would have been prescribed that, but they wouldn't have done that. And it's quite likely that they could have got better, because again, you got to remember that, like, the human body is incredible at healing. And uh, I talked about this in a previous podcast recently, which was the idea of, like, benign neglect or supervised neglect, of, like, letting things heal, like giving it a natural course of history. Like, things will often get better, but you got to remember that, like, there's a cost to that if you aren't doing kind of structured exercise. And there's a really beneficial reason to, like, do exactly what Yanni did there, is which really pushing yourself within your limits. Is that, by the time you have got to that stage of 8 months, for example, of how long it takes to heal, then if you've done nothing for that whole time, you're not where you were. You're weaker, you've lost muscle mass, you've lost strength, and that's not going to put you in a good place. And you're really going to have to, like, you're more likely, like, the biggest predictor of future injury is previous injury. And so if the level you're at before got injured, then now you're at a much lower level. So it's so key
Yeah.
to, like, the exercises might not necessarily be the difference between you healing or not, but it's certainly going to be the difference of your level of function afterwards. So I think that's a really
Yeah.
key thing to understand from the physical place, but also from the mental place for so many of us who, exercise is a big part of just helping yourself feel good, like being able to stay engaged and still feel, like you're identify as someone who is, like, capable and strong and able to, like, do things, like staying engaged with exercise and my mantra is always every injury is an opportunity. So, like, is there some other thing? And the back is super hard because it's hard to not load your back in different exercises. But, like, I mean, I've really come to appreciate bicep curls recently because I carry a baby a lot, and she's only about 11 kilos at the moment. But my gosh, like when you're holding her for,
Yeah,
walking home, she's having a
isometric
tantrum.
contraction.
Yeah, like, man, my shot, like, it is extreme on my arm after a
Yeah,
while. So, like, that when you do have a back issue, like, maybe it's just time to, like, get tickets to the gun show and really like go big, or work on your calves or work on, like, some other part and stay engaged with it, and then do the often not so exciting stuff that
yeah.
is the kind of rehab exercise. Because you remember, like, rehab is training in the presence of injury. It's not some entirely separate thing.
Yeah, it's such a good way to I think end this discussion.
Yeah.
The last thing I've got a great book in my shelf there, The Price of Time, and it's in the context of economics and finance, but you can apply that to exercise too. And what Phil just said there, what's the cost of not doing anything for the next 8 months until you feel like there's no pain anymore? And it is an enormous price to pay, because if you're not stimulating muscles, if you're not exercising, then as time passes and progresses, you are getting weaker, you're getting
Yeah.
less conditioned, you're getting more susceptible to injury, you're getting more frail, more weak, and so this is why I say, irrespective of whether you go down the path of surgical intervention, exercise is paramount for any recovery, and you should be adopting that sort of mindset, no matter how severe your current injury is. I've exercised from the point of being under the knife to being back to normal again, and I'm telling you right now, it starts at day dot. Like, you can always do something, and even if
And
it's just
even,
exercising
like,
the mind.
there's plenty of, like, there's a lot of good research to show that if you exercise before your surgery, you generally have better outcomes. And I'm not 100% sure specifically to, like, we're talking kind of, nerve related back pain. Like, that's something that I'm not 100% on right now. But for so many different conditions, like, the stronger you can be going into it, there's so many times where people end up not needing the surgery, or will recover a whole lot faster. So don't take me to the bank on this for discontinuation issues, but certainly it's a principle that's important to consider if
There
you're
was a
thinking
there,
about surgeries.
There was a new study published recently where I can't remember the exact number, but if you Google it, I'm sure it'll come up. It was all over the mainstream media only a few weeks ago, about something around the vicinity of 70%. They went through the fact that, like, I think 1 in 3 people over their lifetime will suffer severe back pain at some point. And the statistics were that exercise, and for the very first time, they spoke about a balance of exercise. So that required fitness exercise, cardiovascular, strength training, and flexibility training, was
Sounds
somewhere in
familiar.
the vicinity of 70% more effective than pain medication for managing back pain. So, of course, there is caveats to that statement, which we've already spoken about. Getting the right diagnosis, managing your load, the variables that we spoke about, all of that sort of thing. But yeah, exercise is going to be key to any recovery. So make sure that you are moving.
I know we're low on time here, but, like, really quick anecdote that hopefully is helpful in explaining how part of that can work. I had a patient who I've been working with online, and he had a hip replacement that had gone wrong. So not the back here, but just an example of pain medication versus exercise. And he had uh, gone to, like, another country to go get a second opinion. Had a really good experience with that surgeon, but basically was still kind of confused about what was going on. Didn't really understand his surgical report and MRI. He was on loads of painkillers, still trying to play golf, but he had hoped to spend his retirement cycling around Europe and doing big hikes. And I started working with him, and he was completely remote, working with him. And I basically spent a lot of time just, like, walking through his MRI and walking through his surgical report with him and helping him understand the language, because it can be so threatening when you see this stuff, and particularly in the lower back. Like, if you don't understand what's going on, like, every Latin word just sounds like it's just, terminal. So like understanding that, and then having a gradual exposure to exercise with, you know, some good guidance and a good understanding of progressive overload. And for him, it was, yeah, really is like just very basic low body weight strength exercises, and gradually increasing his walking the dog and hiking, and then gradually introducing the bike, and sort of making sure that there were no symptoms, and understanding what different symptoms meant as well. And yeah, within 6 weeks, like he was off all of his pain meds, and he ended up, you know, 12 weeks later going for a 30-day cycle around France, where he's going between 60 and 140k a day, and he's the only one in his like golf crew now who isn't on pain meds. And so I think just, you know, understanding that like structurally it's unlikely that much changed in that time, because he had you know, been in this sort of like kind of state for a long time of like post-surgical but still in pain. But it's that understanding it, and more so I think is that confidence of believing your body can do things again. So I think that's where it becomes really important to understand that like there's obviously going to be a place, and particularly in lower back pain, like pain medication, and like using pain medication to like help deal with it, because it can be so psychologically challenging to deal with extreme pain. But really understanding that like the more you can build up confidence by doing things, and it doesn't have to be super complicated, but like just doing what you can under guidance, then yeah, you'll be in a much better place.
Yeah, great way to finish, and good discussion. I even learned something in that one. So I hope that helps you. If you're dealing with a disc bulge and you're wondering whether exercise is the right choice for you, then of course we recommend first speaking with someone like Phil, and we will make sure that Phil's contacts are in the description of this video so that you can get in touch with him really easily. If you're already in the UMS, then we can always link you up with Phil. But you know, the most important thing I think to take from this is that motion is lotion. Exercise is going to be key to any recovery. It's just about getting the right starting point, the right dosage, and then understanding how to progressively push forward from there, challenging your body in the right amount. So yeah, I hope you learned something from that, and let's go. Let's all work together to overcome our back pain. Both Rad and I are in that journey with you.